Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Mr. Rader back for our second part of our multi-part series on how to design surveys for participation in government. And in this lesson, we'll look at how to contextualize the classical traps that are made in poorly designed surveys and to really think through how to come up with good survey questions. Your homework over the weekend is to come up with a draft of 10 to 15 questions that measure the demographics, the behaviors, the knowledge, and the attitudes of your survey respondents, with the bigger goal being to address and answer your field research question. For the opening prompt, you want to try to describe the problems, if any, with the survey question below. And spoiler alert, there is one big problem and one small problem. So if you look at the question, it says, how much sleep do you normally get on a school night and on the weekend? Notice it's really two different questions. So it could be, how much sleep do you normally get on a school night, and how much sleep do you normally get on the weekend, right? It's really measuring two different things, because individuals might get less sleep on a weeknight, but more sleep on a weekend. That's the big problem. The smaller problem is the answer choices, right? 0 to 3, 4 to 5, 6 to 7, 8 to 9, more than 9. So first and foremost, no individual can sleep 0 hours. The human body literally is designed to sleep. If we don't sleep, you would literally die, right? So that's one issue. The other issue is we don't know what the units are. Are we talking minutes? Are we talking hours? The assumption is the student meant to say hours, but it's really not clear. So better answer choices might be less than 4 hours. 4 to 5 hours, 6 to 7 hours, 8 to 9, more than 9. And then that would allow the respondent to really be able to talk about like how many hours they're actually getting. And a much smarter way to phrase the question in the first place, if you don't want to write hours for every answer choice, is how many hours of sleep do you get on a typical weeknight? Or how many hours of sleep do you get on a typical weekend? So in your Google Doc, you'd be looking at a series of specific problems that come up with these survey questions. So we're going to go through each one in the video and identify the problems that are illustrated in the survey question and consider how it reflects a poorly designed survey question. So the first question that you'll see says, quote, would you vote for or against the candidate who supports reducing federal spending on education and welfare? So similar to the do now, it's a problem because it's double-barreled. It's really two different questions in one. So the question assumes that respondents logically group an education and welfare together. But how would someone respond who was against cutting welfare but favored spending cuts in education? It makes the question very uncertain, ambiguous, and confusing. The second question is also problematic. So the survey question says, on a scale of 1 to 4, 1 being very uninspiring and 4 being very inspiring, how inspiring was the career of legendary shooting guard Michael Jordan, the Chicago Bulls? Again, I bolded the key word here that kind of gives it away. Legendary reveals the bias or the leading part of the question. Basically, when you phrase a survey question like this, you're assuming the respondent is going to agree with you and put a choice of probably choice 4, right? A couple of things just to call out here. Notice the scale goes from negative to positive, at least in this context. And what we're really thinking about here with these questions are inspiration, and the respondent is forced to make a stand. There's no choice 3. So for example, what I mean by that is if the student had written on a scale of 1 to 5, it allows a student to identify, or respondent to identify, a neutral response, which is not the goal or the purpose of a question like this. This category is also problematic because it's a binary, right? Notice it's a yes or no. Have you ever been a victim of bullying? Yes, no, undecided. Like, what does even undecided even mean in that context? It's either a yes or no. Either you have or you haven't. And the way it's phrased is really problematic. A better way to rephrase that behavioral question could be, how often have you been a victim of bullying? Or how often have you witnessed somebody being bullied? And you can get it to be even more specific if you wanted quantitative data. So for example, you could say, how often have you been bullied in the last month? Never. 1 to 2 times, 3 to 4 times, more than 4 times. And you can always change the categories from weeks to months to years, etc. The next survey question that's problematic is vague or meaningless. So for example, the question is asking about awareness of drug overdoses. So why not just ask a specific knowledge question? So for example, how many people died of drug overdoses in New York City in 2016? That's something that could very easily be Googled, and the answer is 1,374. And a better way to phrase a question like that would be to have 3 incorrect answers, or 2, depending on how many answer choices you want, 1 correct answer, and 1 option that would be unsure because you don't necessarily want your respondents guessing randomly for these questions. The next question is problematic because it's asking about this idea of a Rubicon, right? Define Rubicon. It's a technical term. So unless the respondent is already familiar with the concept, they're not really going to be able to answer the survey question. And that's the problem with that question, looking at specifically the attack on Fort Sumter and the start of the Civil War, talking about this as a Rubicon or a point of no return. That's what Rubicon means. It's a point of no return. So in the context of that question, it works, but only if you know what Rubicon means. So in summation, our 5 categories of survey traps are double-barreled questions, biased questions, questions with insufficient answer choices, vague or meaningless questions, and undefined technical terms, right? So for example, you could say like define depression. Well, it's going to be many different definitions, and there are clinical definitions that psychologists and psychiatrists use. One of the things that we'll talk about in a future video and in class is that for certain projects with technical terms, you'll want to have what's called operational definitions so that your survey respondent knows exactly what the terms they need to know are so that they can successfully complete your survey. So what you'll do in the second part of the lesson is in your Google Doc, you're going to record your field research question in the survey template. You'll take a look at the draft that you put together with a partner, or if you're out of the building due to quarantine or for other reasons, you can always share it with a partner online or a friend or a family member. See if you made any of these classical survey mistakes. You'll want to add to your list possible questions that look at demographics, knowledge, behaviors, attitudes, etc. And then you want to copy and paste the survey template into a new blank Google Doc and save it with your name and survey as the file name. If you are working in a partnership, you'll include your name and your partner's name. The statement of confidentiality is included to ensure your participants that their anonymity will be respected and that their privacy will be respected. This is a review from the first video on surveys, part 1, which you can also find on this YouTube channel. The 4 question types are demographic questions. Again, who are they? Who is the respondent? Behavioral questions, knowledge questions, and attitudinal questions. We'll end this second part by looking at 2 more slides, one of which is a really bad survey from a former student. That was an initial first draft, and then the second just being a well-developed survey question. So if you notice, the student copy-pasted the statement of confidentiality, but didn't bother to write statement of, it just says statement confidentiality. That's kind of a problem. And the first question says, do you think that bullying is a big issue in the United States? No, somewhat, yes, no opinion. Well, this is a perfect example of what not to do, right? Like, what does that even mean? What is a big issue? Like, how do you qualify that? Maybe a better question could say, how concerned are you with the frequency of bullying in the United States? And it could range from like very unconcerned to very concerned. It would be a much better question, right? If we look at question number 3, have you ever witnessed a bullying? I think the student might want to say like, have you witnessed bullying? But again, it's the problem with the binary yes, no, and then like the no opinion really makes no sense at all with that question. So you could phrase it such as, how often have you witnessed someone being bullied? And it could be either answer choices like never, rarely, sometimes, or often, or it could be actually quantified. So how often have you witnessed bullying in the last year? Never, or less than 2 times, 2 to 3 times, 4 to 5 times, more than 5 times. And then this last slide looks at the same survey question that we ended the part 1 video with, which was looking at racial group and ethnic group identity. Jen, just to kind of call it out, the question provides the respondent with multiple options really to identify what they identify as. So that'll do it for this video today. Please use this material to help you complete your first draft of the survey. Have a great day.